I have to say, as an academic, my natural inclination on hearing the very insightful comments of my colleagues is to try to recast them in theoretical terms so that I can add value. I'm going to hit your point, but I want to start with something that Thomas said, which I think is very important. He talked about the politics of crisis. I would probably go back to the argument that was made by Theodore Lowy in the early 1970s and talk about this not as a politics of crisis, but as a politics of disorder. And the reason that I want to talk about the politics of disorder and not crisis is because we all know that crisis is a temporal moment, right? You get through crisis. It goes beyond you. You just hold on tight. You're going to find yourself on the other end of crisis. I don't think we're ever going to find ourselves on the other end of the situation that my colleagues have described, right? We're in a situation right now where we're losing the most important source of power that we have to control our environment. And that source of power is collective action. We're talking about the West and asking if we should reinvent the West, but what we're really saying is, should we get a bunch of rich countries that have similar values to work together to help control their environment? We can ask that question in a European context. We can ask that question in a global context. We can ask that question in a national context, where we look at a country like Belgium and say, look, these people share a common geography, they speak different languages, but they have a long experience of working together. Belgium used to be the political science model for consensus. And now, since 2007, Belgium has been showing anything but consensus. Belgium has been showing anything but consensus. Italy has been showing anything but consensus. The Netherlands has had the most unprecedented period of political instability since 2002 that the country has ever experienced. Nothing that shows consensus. The same thing in the West, the same thing in Europe. And this is where I turn to your question. This Euro problem was never meant to be a problem, but they couldn't agree on a solution. So the first instinct when the Greeks revealed the extent of their underreporting of the deficit, not for the first time, not for the second time, not for the third time, but once again, the first instinct was to try to ignore the problem because they knew they couldn't get agreement within the German government and they knew they couldn't get agreement across Europe as a whole. They've continued to muddle through trying to ignore this problem, trying to solve it in very small ways without addressing the core issues. And everybody keeps saying, just like George Osborne said, well, we'll wait for the next meeting and somehow by the next meeting we have to come up with a solution. I'll tell you what, they're never going to come up with a solution because there is no easy solution at this point. They're going to continue to muddle through. That doesn't mean they're going to crash and burn. There's not going to be some big disaster. It's just not going to solve the problem. And that's important because of what we're not looking at. We're not looking at the possibility that somebody's going to make a mistake, that there's going to be a failed bond offering in Italy that's going to spook the markets, that the Greek government is going to collapse suddenly, or that some other country that we hadn't anticipated as being problematic, like France, is going to fail to step in and recapitalize its banks, and indeed a banking scandal like we just saw with UBS in France could precipitate a huge run on the French banking system. Now, these kinds of problems Europe is not ready to address in anything like a collective manner while it's muddling through this crisis. And in the politics of disorder, it's these unexpected events that pose the greatest challenge. The Arab awakening was the unexpected event that posed the greatest challenge to the West, and it's only one of several. And so I think if there's one idea I want to put out, it's that not that power has shifted from west to east, not that there's been this rise of a multipolar world, but that collective action has broken down. And as collective action has broken down, our control over our environment has broken down along with it.
That's